Hola a todos, bienvenidos de nuevo a Don Gato. Hoy estaremos reaccionando a este video de la Segunda Guerra Mundial de Oversimplified, que significaría eso como sobre simplificado. Lo malo es que esto está en inglés y lo bueno es que pues tiene subtítulos. Voy a ver, están activados.
Now, without further ado,
Deben empezar los subtítulos
it's
ya.
1902. A young man by the name of
Lean los
Benito
subtítulos
Mussolini
acá
moves from
abajo.
Italy to Switzerland to avoid military service. He gets big into socialism, working for trade
Socialismo.
unions, writing for socialist newspapers, advocating a violent overthrow of European monarchies, the whole shebang. This gets him in a bit of trouble with the Swiss police, so he gets arrested,
¿Lo
sent
arrestan?
back to Italy, set free, returns to
No sé por qué lo
Switzerland, is
liberaron.
arrested again, goes back to Italy again, completes his military service after previously avoiding it, and then after a brief stint as an elementary school teacher, he finally
señor.
returns to work as an avid socialist. His speeches and journalistic abilities made him famous among Italian socialists. He was anti-war, so when Italy
Antiguerra.
colonized Libya in 1910, he rioted and got arrested.
¿Otra
Then World War
vez?
I came along, and once again he protested Italy's involvement. But then he thought, wait a minute, this war could bring about the social climate needed to overthrow European monarchies and bring about the socialist revolution
Sí, cierto.
everywhere. And suddenly he
Tiene
was
sentido.
pro-war, but his fellow socialists didn't like his new pro-war stance. So
Y
they
también
kicked
eso
him out of
tiene
the party.
sentido.
So then he said, you know what? I'm done with socialism. We need something new, not based on class divisions tearing us apart, but based
Y
on
ahora
unity
este señor
through
va a crear
nationality. We'll
otro
conquer the
imperio
Mediterranean
romano.
and reunite all Italian peoples, just like the days of the Roman Empire.
¿Está?
I'll call it fascismo, and it will
Fascismo.
guide the Italian nation to
El
greatness.
fascismo fue
That's
creado.
all well and good, Mr. Mussolini, but what kind of haircut am I giving you? Let's go with bold.
¿En serio?
¿En serio?
Segunda Guerra Mundial.
Italy had been on the winner's side in World War I,
Yay!
and they hoped they were going to get a lot out of it, but in the end, they only got a little, and they felt cheated. On top of that, a bad economy and weak governments meant that the Italian people were a little unhappy. So when Mussolini came along and said that he could fix everything, his
puedo
fascist
arreglar todo.
movement gained a lot of support. In 1922, he went to the king and said, "Make me prime minister, or I'll make me prime minister." And the king said, "You and what army?" "This army." Fair
Sale
enough.
bien.
Then he went about establishing a dictatorship with himself at its center. Europe had its first fascist
El
dictator.
Duce,
Next
el
up,
Duc.
Germany. Germany
Es
had been
Hitler.
on the loser's side, and they got absolutely wrecked
Pobre.
by the Treaty of Versailles. They lost territory, had to
Okay.
demilitarize the Rhineland,
Okay.
had to reduce their army to just 100,000
Sí,
men,
Alemania fue
couldn't have an
destrozada
air force,
por
had to pay the Allies a
la
huge amount of money
Primera
that
Guerra
it didn't
Mundial.
have, and a new rule was established that every Englishman withheld the right to walk into the center of Berlin, pick out any German they wanted, and spank the hell out of them.
Sí,
I
sí,
made
ya
that last
entendí,
one
ya
up,
entendí.
but it helps you understand how all this felt to Germans. On top of that, a bad economy and weak governments meant that when a small angry man
Casi
with a
lo mismo que
silver mustache
Italia,
came
nomás que en
along and said
Alemania.
that he could fix everything, the German people loved it. Hitler had been a soldier during World War I, and he was crazy patriotic, and nobody was madder than him about Germany's humiliation. He helped start a new
sentido.
political party, and in 1923
Fascismo.
attended a march on Munich with his boys.
Y
And
lo
then he got
arrestaron.
arrested. But his popularity grew and grew, and in 1933, the president made him chancellor. He believed he was Germany's great destined
Y,
savior, and he went
y las cosas se van a poner mal
establishing
dentro
a
de poco.
dictatorship with himself at its center. Europe had fascist dictator number 2. Hitler and Mussolini had a lot of the same ideas, but more importantly, they had the same enemies,
Los mismos
and they
enemigos.
started to get along.
Hey.
Anyone else want to be friends?
Un
Franco?
rosco.
No?
La
You good?
guerra
I do.
civil.
Who's that? It's Japan, and they've taken over northern China. Let's rewind a bit. Japan had isolated itself from the rest of the world for over 200 years until the Americans showed up and said, "You're going to trade with us and you're going to like it." Then the Western powers imposed a bunch of unequal treaties, meaning Japan's economy was bust. They also had no natural resources, so they decided to go get some. They
Ataquen.
went to war with China to gain a sphere of influence over Korea, and they took a bunch of China's stuff. But then the West said, "Hey, cut that out." And since Japan couldn't take on the West, they said, "Okay, I guess we'll just go home." Wait a minute, what are you doing? Taking advantage of a weakened China and setting up spheres of influence. But I was the one who weakened them. We know. And you guys didn't let me have anything. We know. That seems unfair. We don't think so.
Sí, era injusto.
Okay, see ya. So Japan thought, screw this, and went to war with Russia, and stunned everyone by actually
Adiós,
winning.
Rusia.
Then they fully annexed Korea, but they didn't stop there. In World War I, they took Germany's colonies and islands in
Islas.
Asia. And then in an incident that was maybe staged
Ah, espérate. Espérense. Deja cierro la puerta. Se va a oír un poco de música de fondo porque a mi mamá se le ocurrió poner música cuando estoy haciendo un video.
Japanese army, a bomb blew up a Japanese train in Manchuria, giving them an excuse to launch an
Okay.
invasion and take over. So here's the situation. Nazi Germany, Fascist Italy, and Japan all believe they're racially superior, all feel hostility towards the Allies, and all want to militarize and take over more stuff. And so they did. Let's start with Germany. Hitler hated the Treaty of Versailles, and now he was ready to begin undoing it. In complete violation of the treaty, the first Luftwaffe squadrons were set up, conscription was introduced, and he pimped up his army. The Allies did nothing. Then Hitler sent his army back into the demilitarized Rhineland, giving orders to immediately retreat if the Allies showed up. The Allies did nothing. With his military re-strengthened, he could now move on to step 2. He wanted to rapidly increase the Aryan population, and to do so, he needed Lebensraum. Or in other words, he would have to take over the world. But for now, a good portion of Europe would do. And he began eyeing up his neighbors. The Allies finally started to get worried, so they implemented a fairly useless diplomatic strategy called appeasement. And it went a little something like this. Hitler would say, I want that thing. And the Allies would say, you can't have that thing. Okay, you can have that thing, but no more. I want that thing. And repeat. In 1938, Hitler's army marched into Austria and just took it, with no resistance. Boom. This is Germany now. Next, he demanded to become the Sudetenland, an area of Czechoslovakia with many ethnic Germans. The Allies held a meeting with Hitler in Munich and said, look, we're going to give you what... Hang on. This meeting is about my territory. Shouldn't I come to the meeting too? Anyway, we're going to give you what you want. Really? Yeah. Just like that? Yep. What's the catch? Just sign this piece of paper.
Mi hermana nomás está abriendo la puerta y se sale y se mete.
Promising you won't invade the rest of Czechoslovakia. Okay. Then Chamberlain returned home victorious, waving a signed piece of paper in the air, declaring crisis to be averted. So we built a statue of Chamberlain in his honor, and every day on the 30th of September we celebrate Chamberlain Day. Hitler's invading the rest of Czechoslovakia. What? He's invading the rest of Czechoslovakia. Oh. You lied to me. What do you expect? I'm Hitler. Not to be outdone, Mussolini also wanted to get in on the action. He thought to himself, isn't there a not yet colonized nation somewhere which is so underdeveloped that the people would be defending themselves against our tanks with literal bows and arrows and wooden spears? Oh, there is? Fantastic. And so he took it. Italy also wanted to control the entrance to the Adriatic Sea, so they occupied Albania. Then, in another incident which was maybe staged by the Japanese, gunfire was exchanged by Japanese and Chinese troops at the Marco Polo Bridge. And the Japanese launched yet another invasion against China. They swept through Beijing and Shanghai, and then advanced to the Yangtze Valley to China's then capital, Nanking. It was here that saw the worst of Japan's shocking atrocities committed against the Chinese people.
Yo siempre supe que la capital de China era Beijing.
Italy made their relationship status official by signing the Pact of Steel. Then Hitler turned his eyes towards Poland and the hated Polish corridor, splitting Germany in two. At this point, the Allies really had to put their foot down, and they warned him that an invasion of Poland would mean war. Hitler had planned to continue his advance eastward, but he didn't want to end up fighting a war on two fronts. So for now, he made an alliance with Stalin, saying, "How about we both invade Poland and split it between the two of us?" And I definitely will not refrain from not betraying you sometime in the
Esto va a
future.
salir mal.
Sounds good.
Okay.
This new alliance stunned
Pero
the
va a
West.
terminar muy mal.
On the 1st of September 1939, German troops entered Poland, and Britain and France declared war on Germany. The Poles fought hard, but they were no match for the two giants crashing down on them from either
están
side.
aplastando
Then came
dos
a period known as
piedras.
the Phony War,
Es una
where everyone just sort of sat
hormiga,
around not
digamos, una
doing much.
cucaracha y te están
The
aplastando
French
dos
had launched a
piedras.
small
Estás
invasion into
muerto.
the Saarland, but they maintained mostly defensive positions, and after a while decided to just turn around and call it a day. Speaking of France, the French were still super proud of their victory in World War I, and they hadn't really moved on from it. They still used horses, they dispatched messages by motorbike instead of
tiene
using
caballo?
radio. Orders from the commander-in-chief were usually pretty vague, and the troops were rarely inspected. They built a line of defenses along their German border, but didn't bother extending it all the way to the Channel.
Eso
And
fue un
they would
error.
launch artillery strikes against Germany out of fear of being retaliated against. In a war, they didn't want to attack the enemy. And at first the
Esto es
UK
malo.
wasn't much better. Chamberlain still naively hoped that the war could be ended diplomatically. Instead of bombing raids, the RAF dropped propaganda leaflets over German cities, which one air marshal said likely did nothing but provide the continent with toilet paper for the duration of the war. They also only sent 200,000 men to France, while the French had mobilized millions. Both Britain and France wanted to avoid a repeat of the First World War, and so they wanted to keep the war as far from home as possible. So they turned their eyes north, towards Norway. Neutral Sweden was exporting iron ore to Germany through neutral Norway. So the Allies asked them if they could please stop exporting iron ore to Germany, but this request was refused. Then the Soviet Union attacked Finland. So the Allies said, how about we land troops in Norway and move them across Sweden to go help out your good pal Finland, and along the way maybe take control of all your arms. But Norway and Sweden still said no. So the UK mined the waters around Norway to force any transport ships into international waters, and they also attacked a German tanker they found in the area. Hitler realized what the Allies were up to, and he quickly moved to secure his supply of iron ore. He launched an invasion through Denmark into Norway. The Allies rushed to land troops at key ports along the coast, but Germany had taken control of Norway's airfield, and their air superiority decided the fight. The Allies had to retreat. After this slightly embarrassing failure, Chamberlain resigned and was replaced with Winston Churchill, who had a slightly different approach to dealing with the Germans. Hitler's overall strategy was similar to Germany's First World War strategy. Attack France, defeat France, knocking out the UK in the process, then turn on the Soviet Union and win the war. During the phony war, the Allies had given Hitler time to prepare his forces. Now, he was ready to attack. The Allies had wanted to place troops in Belgium, but Belgium had refused, and in a move that surprised pretty much no one, Hitler launched an invasion to get around France's defenses. The Allies charged into Belgium at full speed to meet the German invasion head on, and it looked like a repeat of the First World War was coming, but this time Hitler had a trick up his sleeve. Y los Países Bajos también eran neutrales. Then, to the south, the French had left the Ardennes, an area full of hills and forests, pretty underdefended because they thought it was naturally impenetrable. Well, the Germans were about to penetrate it with everything they had. They smashed 50 Wehrmacht divisions through and encircled the Allied armies at lightning speed. The best of the Allied forces were now trapped. The Germans squeezed in from all sides, taking out France's best armies and nearly wiping out the British too. But they managed to make a desperate last-minute escape at Dunkirk, with British civilian ships even making the perilous journey to bring their young men home. With most of the French forces depleted, the Germans breezed through, taking Paris, and France fell. What the Germans couldn't do in World War I, Hitler had done just like that. Hitler hoped that with the fall of France, the UK would also lose hope and sue for peace. But quite annoyingly, it didn't, and he needed to secure the Western Front, so he tried to force them into submission with mind games. The UK were now all alone, and Hitler wanted to emphasize that. First of all, just before France fell, Italy finally declared war on the Allies, making the UK situation even worse. Next, instead of just occupying all of France, Hitler occupied the coastal areas for defense, but allowed France to continue its existence as a German puppet state. This way, it looked like the UK's old ally had decided to switch sides. Hitler also hoped that the UK wouldn't attack any of her old allies' navy bases or colonies in Africa, giving Hitler an extra line of defense to the south. But the UK made sure to respond to this by sailing down to France's navy base in Algeria and wrecking a bunch of ships. So have at it. Hitler then began laying down plans for an invasion of Great Britain. Before German troops could land on British soil, he would first need air and naval superiority across the Channel. Waves of German bombers came.
Cierra la puerta.
The completely outnumbered RAF worked bravely around the clock in an attempt to
hoy cumple cumpleaños mi hermana.
Then it attacked RAF bases, crippling the RAF's ability to defend the nation. And it looked like Hitler's Great British invasion was coming. But then, Churchill ordered a small, pretty insignificant bombing raid over Berlin. It didn't do much damage, but Hitler was furious, and he immediately ordered the Luftwaffe to refocus its attacks on civilian targets in London. Children were sent off to the countryside away from their parents to avoid danger, and frequent trips to air raid shelters became a daily occurrence. But British morale held firm. Smiling, knitting, lounging casually, these people have balls of steel. This refocusing on London also gave the RAF breathing space to reorganize, so Hitler kind of shot himself in the foot there. Just the foot for now. Finally, the Luftwaffe sent one massive all-out attack on London, and the RAF successfully repelled it, destroying many of the German aircraft and placing air superiority firmly in British hands. Hitler's invasion had to be postponed, but the bombing of British cities continued for some time.
Y ahora está la segunda parte, ¿la vemos? Pues yo sí quiero. Pero claro, tengo que poner los subtítulos. Anuncio, ahí está.
So what else is happening? Well, when I said Britain was all alone, that wasn't entirely true. Many Commonwealth nations and other Allied colonies had joined the war in Britain's support. They would play a key role throughout the war, particularly in the African and Italian campaigns. On the Axis
side, vieron eso, pero en la parte de Canadá, miren, de Estados Unidos en vez de la bandera de Canadá, ahí donde está Canadá, ¿sí lo ven? En la parte azul. En un lado está Canadá acá y en el otro está Estados Unidos. Y pues dice, pues ponen la bandera de Canadá y va, y pues dicen, ups, lo siento Canadá. No sé si pudieron ver eso, pero está.
Particularly in the African and Italian campaigns. On the Axis side, Germany, Italy, and Japan signed the defensive tripartite pact, bringing their military alliance even closer together. The Soviet Union's war against Finland should have been an easy victory, but it became a humiliating struggle, and their military ineptitude was put on full display. In the end, they did force the Finns to sue.
Es como las tortugas, tienen mucha defensa y todo eso, pero nomás las volteas y ya nada más están como...
For peace. Then they continued their honorable campaign of pushing around much
Díganme si quieren que haga más reacciones y díganme de qué, de juegos, de este tipo de videos, cosas de ese estilo. Sí, Francia. Muerte.
The Allies also tried to capture the strategic port of Dakar, but that ended in failure.
Muerte.
Mussolini had seen Hitler's successes, and he thought now it was Italy's time to shine. So he tried to take British Somaliland, and that went pretty well. Then he tried to take Egypt, and that went less well. Then he tried to take Greece, and that went really badly. Churchill began referring to Italy as Europe's soft underbelly. He began favoring a military campaign from the south and started sending British troops to Greece. All of this had Hitler pretty concerned, and he moved to protect his southern flank. He had been getting friendly with Hungary and twisted their arm into signing the Tripartite Pact and joining the Axis powers. Romania was also eager to join for protection against the Soviet Union. The Tripartite Pact was designed to prevent any other countries from deciding to join the Allies, specifically Britain's old ally, the pesky United States of America. When war first broke out, American public opinion was strongly against joining in. In 1940, there was an election. The Republican candidate said, "I will not send any young Americans to die in Europe." And sitting President Franklin D. Roosevelt said, "I will also not send any young Americans to die in Europe. Unless I have to, then I might." And Roosevelt won. Churchill asked him to join the war, but Roosevelt said, "No can do, Winston. But you know what? Here, have some weapons." America began supplying the Allies with food and munitions, but there was one problem. German U-boats were sinking thousands of Allied supply ships in the Atlantic, including American ones. If the Germans could sever Britain's supply line, the UK would starve. Throughout the war, the Allies had to come up with better technology to fight the U-boats. Improved radar, aircraft with longer range, better weaponry and convoy tactics. At one point, a man even called a meeting and said, "Pykrete, you take some wood, you take some ice, you put them together, you get pykrete."
No sé cómo le hicieron para hacer esa madera que nomás es madera más hielo. Ninguno de los dos es muy duro, un hielo como un vidrio un poco más duro, nomás lo avientas y lo piensas un poco y ya. Y pues la madera nomás con un balazo y ya. Pero miren.
Then they tried to make a pykrete aircraft carrier, but that idea was scrapped because that's a really dumb idea. In the end, Alan Turing and his team of codebreakers cracked Germany's Enigma code, and the U-boats gradually became less and less of a threat. Back in Africa, Britain decided to push Italy out of Egypt. Hey, that was pretty easy, so they kept going. Hitler realized he was going to have to finally step in and do something. He went to Bulgaria and Yugoslavia and said, "Hey,
Yugoslavia todavía
troops for
existe.
you to get to Greece, so either join us or, be invaded." Bulgaria opted to join them. Yugoslavia opted to be invaded. Then Greece finally fell to the joint German-Italian invasion. The British had moved troops from North Africa to fight in Greece, which helped Rommel and his tank divisions push the British back to Egypt. And they could have kept going, but a small, mostly Australian force held out under siege for 8 months.
8 meses esa cosilla.
Strategic port city and disrupting their supply line. Despite having some success in the Middle East, the British didn't seem like any real threat for now. Hey, Soviet Union. Look out.
Sabía que eso iba a terminar mal.
Hitler launched the largest ground invasion in history, and Stalin was far from ready. Both Churchill and Roosevelt had warned him of an impending attack, but he dug his head in the sand, and the Soviets didn't stand a chance. Germany made staggering progress, with huge encircling movements capturing mind-boggling numbers of Russian troops. 250,000 at Bialystok, Minsk, 300,000 at Smolensk, nearly 700,000 at Kiev, and again at Vyazma and Bryansk. Leningrad was put under a siege that would last an insufferable 4 years.
4 años en Leningrado.
Hitler's main ideological goal from the beginning, and his hatred for the ethnic peoples there was now unleashed in all its fury. The Eastern Front of the Second World War was brutal for all that endured it. The Germans were now inside of Moscow, and that's it. It's all over. But then it happened. It got cold. Stupid cold. Hitler had hoped the Soviets would give up before winter, but they kept fighting. His commanders came to him and
Parece
said,
que el invierno ruso da más miedo que el ejército alemán.
Keep going. But oil is literally freezing inside our vehicles. That's fine. Keep going. We're having to leave the corpses of our frozen horses by the side of the road so we can still find our way in the snowdrift. Perfectly normal. Keep going. Hitler hadn't given his millions of men winter clothing and supplies because he thought he really should have won by now. Then, Stalin called in troops from the Siberian front, specially trained to fight in the extreme cold, and the Germans were no match. They were now being pushed back. They had no choice but to dig in and wait for winter to end. Germany's victories were staggering, and Japan was eager not to miss the victory bus. Their war in China had come to a standstill, but they wanted to keep expanding their sphere of influence and getting the sweet, sweet raw materials. They began making plans to expand southward, but there was a problem. Southeast Asia was heavily colonized by America and Great Britain. It was also full of ocean. Ocean meant naval combat, and there was no way the Japanese Navy could stand up to the US and the UK. So they thought, wouldn't it be nice if we could destroy their navies before we began and so it was. On December 7th, 1941, the Japanese launched a surprise air raid on the Pacific Fleet in Pearl Harbor and inflicted a huge amount of damage. They also attacked British colonies in Southeast Asia. Roosevelt had no choice but to declare war on Japan, and so did Churchill. Hitler then declared war on America, even though he totally didn't have to. The attack
Se
on
disparó
Pearl
otra vez
Harbor
en el
seemed like a
pie.
big Japanese
Solo el
victory,
pie.
but they didn't attack any of the naval repair yards, fuel storage tanks, or the submarine
Mala
base,
idea.
meaning the Pacific Fleet would be up and running again pretty soon. In the meantime, though, the Japanese were able to begin their conquest. They took Guam, the Gilbert Islands, Wake Island, Hong Kong, and the Philippines. They forced Thailand to join them so they could march their troops through to Malaya. They swept through Singapore, North Borneo, the East Indies, New Guinea, the Solomons, and they were now threatening northern Australia and the borders of India. Japan's victory had been as staggering as the Germans, and it reinforced the Japanese idea that this was a divine war which they were destined to win. But their victories had been based on speed, not power, and power would eventually catch up with them. For now, though, in all occupied nations, the people suffered. Persecution, forced labor, harsh punishments for any who spoke out against their occupiers. In Europe, the Nazis were rounding up ethnic minorities and other unwanted groups and individuals. In particular, millions of Jewish people would suffer through the terrible events of the Holocaust. Brave resistance movements rose up in defiance of their invaders, while the people held out for hope. And hope was coming. Winter was over, and Hitler could continue his push eastward. But this time, he switched up his strategy. He wanted to focus on the south. His plan was to cut off the Russian armies in the Caucasus, an area full of oil, and then invade the Caucasus and take all the oil. His forces moved across the north with ease, and Hitler got cocky. He rerouted the 4th Panzer Army south early, leaving the 6th Army to complete the encircling movement alone. To do so, the 6th Army had to reach and take the key Soviet city of Stalingrad. The Russians defended it fiercely.
Stalin no quería que tomaran eso porque llevaba su nombre.
The entire war. The Soviets held up the German advance for 5 months as they
Creo que era al
battled
revés,
the
que
bought them
los
valuable
alemanes
time.
querían
When the
conquistarlo
Germans had
porque
first launched
llevaba
their
el nombre de
invasion a year earlier,
Stalin.
the Soviets had moved their factories to the east. Those factories had been building a butt ton of tanks and aircraft and getting the Soviet army up to scratch. Now, it was ready. Stalin gathered his new and improved forces around the city, and in an attack that resembled Hitler's own encirclement tactics, they began surrounding the 6th Army. Hitler's commanders came to him and said, "Hey, maybe we should retreat." But Hitler said, No, you stay.
Y se disparó otra vez en el pie.
The
Solo el
entire
pie.
6th Army was trapped and had to surrender. With complete air superiority, the Soviets started pushing westward. For Stalin, it was a resounding victory. For Hitler, an absolute catastrophe. Things also weren't looking too good for Hitler elsewhere. With America now in the war, Allied bombing over German cities reached devastating levels. In Africa, the British had pushed Rommel back again. Then they were pushed back again, and finally, after a decisive battle at El Alamein, and with American and British troops arriving in the west, the Germans and Italians were squeezed out of Africa. Japan was also already seeing its rapid success being turned around. They attempted to take the island of Midway, but the US Navy was ready for the attack, and they sank Japan's carrier. Actually, they sank a lot of them. It was a battle from which the Japanese Navy would never recover. British, Indian, and Chinese troops held the line in the harsh jungle terrain of Burma, and the Japanese suffered losses in the Solomon Islands and New Guinea. They began to realize they were not invincible. With the Axis out of Africa, the Allies had to decide their next move. Churchill still wanted to attack from the south, while the Americans preferred a full-sea invasion in northern France. All right, said the Americans, we'll do it your way. Allied forces...
Voy a continuar esto mañana. Adiós.